Rich is better than poor, but it's not as good as being wealthy, right? And this approach is an understanding of how do I create real generational wealth. If you look at your financial life, pretty much everything that exists falls into one or more of four categories. You have non-passive, you have passive, you have portfolio, and you have personal, right? Those are the four spectrums of assets and income. And I separate them because the income that exists within those spectrums are treated differently. And the asset protection or the liabilities associated with the assets in those spectrums are different, right? So those four spectrums of assets and income are really different from one another and should be attacked differently when it comes to designing the infrastructure that you have. But when I teach the Real Wealth Matrix, I'm essentially showcasing to my ecosystem that there is a hierarchy of ownership. We utilize trusts, we utilize holding companies, we utilize operating companies, right? In the non-passive spectrum, that would incorporate things like your traditional businesses, right? If you own a business and operate a business. This would also incorporate your ability to earn income via W-2. Like if you're a high-income W-2 professional, your financial life, where you generate your income, lives and resides in the non-passive spectrum. Now that gets subjected to both self-employment tax and ordinary income tax, right? From a taxation standpoint. It gets subjected to the traditional tax from a liability standpoint, inside out and outside in liability, right? But this ecosystem can be structured in such a way to help you offset those dangers, right? It can be structured in just the right way to offset your dangers. Like you could have your operating company down here, separate it from the ownership of it, right? Where all the wealth, let's say your IP, your intellectual property, your domain names, your methodologies by which you do business, they could all be owned by your holding company and leased down to the operating company below it. And you may say, well, Edward, why would I do that? Well, because if that operating company ever had a problem, you can close it down and create a new one and now lease those things to the new entity, right? This is what the wealthy do, guys. Like the wealthy have structure on purpose, right? It's intentional by design. When it comes to real estate assets, again, maybe we have trusts, maybe we have holding companies, maybe we have what I call beneficial operating companies, and we may leverage land trusts to actually own real estate, right? And we do this infrastructure because we're trying to accomplish a variety of different goals, a variety of different objectives. The land trust helps to keep your name off of the deed. So your name is not on the public record. So no one knows that you personally own this property. Beneficial ownership company, that operating company, beneficial operating company, that can serve now as the landlord, right? The landlord for that property, so that the tenants don't know that you own the property. They're not sending their checks to you. The holding company, we could aggregate, maybe you and your spouse, right? Want to own that holding company together. And why would you do that? Well, we want to leverage the ability to get a K-1 instead of just having all of that income flow to page 1 of your Schedule E. And you may say, well, Edward, why does that matter? Well, if you want to borrow money in the future, you have to recognize that the lenders look at your tax returns and they will evaluate different sections of your tax returns in different ways. Page 2 of the Schedule E, you're looked at more like a professional in the real estate game. And they give you a little bit better weight, if you will, with regard to how those dollars are going into your ability to access capital. Like I'm dropping real nuggets here, guys. This is really how this stuff works, right? This is really how this stuff works. And if you set it up the right way, you can even set up your portfolio spectrum. Again, having your trust at the top of the ecosystem, you can set up a holding company to own your portfolio assets. Maybe that's your crypto. Maybe that's your traditional non-qualified investment accounts. You may say, Edward, why do I want to do that? Well, in your personal life, if you ever get sued personally, that litigator is going to go after your liquidity, and your investment portfolio is very liquid. It's more liquid than your real estate, right? They don't necessarily want to own your house. They want to own your cash. And if you set up a holding company the right way, let's say a Wyoming LLC, we can leverage Wyoming's COPE. COPE, C-O-P-E, COPE. That stands for Charging Order Protection Entity. It's an amazing asset protection mechanism that exists inside of Wyoming statutes, right? This is why this all makes sense, guys. Like when you put the structure in place, and in the personal spectrum, maybe you have different types of trusts. Maybe you have some personal property trusts, right? Maybe you have some, let's say you have a family compound that you're interested in making sure that it stays within the family, right? Maybe you're going to use a qualified personal residence trust to ensure that that property gets passed on generation from generation, right? You could structure things in the right way. You can make sure your will is set up the right way, that your power of attorney for financial matters is set up the right way. Your power of attorney for healthcare matters is set up the right way. Your living will, right? You can set up all of this infrastructure just the right way to get just the right outcomes. This is why the Rockefeller method is so critically important, because when you structure things the right way and you safeguard them, you can now start talking about, how do I accumulate more, right? How can I put every dollar that I get into our ecosystem to work to make more dollars? Because let me tell you this, guys, if you don't give your dollars a job, they become the employee of someone else. And that is the critical difference between someone who's interested in wealth creation versus just someone who's looking to become rich. Don't get me wrong. It's way better to be rich than it is to be poor. I've been both. I didn't come from money. Like my family, we had to work really hard just to get up to the poverty line, right? I'm not saying that my situation was the worst situation that ever existed in the world. It was pretty darn challenging for me growing up, right? It just is what it is, right? But don't get me wrong, rich is better than poor, but it's not as good as being wealthy, right? And this approach is an understanding of, how do I create real generational wealth? Because you need to make sure that you have the cash flow, right, that can fund the insurance, that can fund distributions that you want to make during your lifetime to yourself, that can fund philanthropy, right? You need the cash flow that can be able to do that, because here's another truth that they don't teach in the traditional education ecosystem. It's really difficult to spend appreciation, right? But you hear financial gurus talking about all this time, like buy assets, get assets, accumulate assets. Yes, that's definitely good. But an asset, under my definition, is something you control, which generates cash flow for you, because you spend cash flow. You don't spend appreciation. There's a lot of friction to getting access to appreciation. I had a discussion very, very recently, just a week or so ago, with specifically with an accountant who was arguing with me and was saying, well, real estate goes up in value. And I agree with that for the most part, right? Real estate over longer periods of time tends to appreciate in value. But the problem is accessing that appreciation, there's a lot of friction. You either have to borrow, which requires paperwork. It's not always easy, right? Sometimes you don't qualify. Right? Why? Because most lenders require some form of income, right? Cash flow, to be able to demonstrate that you are a safety profile, if you will, safe profile for them to lend you money. Or I have to sell the property, right? Which also is not necessarily done overnight. See, it's really hard to pick up a house and go to the grocery store and buy eggs with it, right? You need cash flow, right? So structuring your financial life in just the right way is critically important, because you want to ensure that cash flow is something you constantly have access to, right? And I recognize how strange that can sound from someone like myself, who one of the companies I own is a private wealth management firm, which is all about traditional investing. I totally get that. And that has a role, but it's not the end all and be all, right? You have to make sure that the overall structure that you're going for, again, if you're interested in the Rockefeller method, this is how it works, right? Long-term investment strategies need to be incorporated with the concept of reinvestment of those profits. Now, those reinvestment activities could be towards traditional investments. They could be towards non-traditional, like things like crypto. They could be towards real assets, like real estate, right? There's lots of different places to invest your cash flow. But you have to make sure you're creating it in the first place, and then safeguarding it, and then preserving it, right? From all of the things that want access to it, including dear old Uncle Sam. If you got value from this video, go ahead and click that like button. And if you want to be informed of new videos that could help take your life and your business to the next level, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.